Good morning, distinguished guests. Welcome to the Finance and Growth Policy event here in Republic of Moldova. How do you feel today? Very good. So we can move on with important information we have. We are grateful for your presence here today as Moldova advances on its EU convergence path. We have key questions about structural transformation and sustainable growth. Today we are going to examine how targeted financial sector reforms can support small and medium-sized enterprises development, innovation and productivity enhancement, drawing up on valuable lessons from Central and Eastern European countries' accession experiences. Over the next hours, we will benefit from the rich experience of our special guests, brought from financial institutions, regulatory bodies they are part of. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to invite to the stage for the official opening Mrs. Anca Drago, Governor of the Bank of the Republic of Moldova, who will speak about the achievements and reforms being implemented by the National Bank of Moldova in the process of the Republic of Moldova's accession to the European Union.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for starting this day with us here at Urban Center. It is a pleasure to be our host today and to examine important topics related to growth and finance. We are honored by the presence of Madam Commissioner for Financial Services, Maria Luís Albuquerque, and I have to tell you something that many years ago, okay, not so many, maybe 2017, 18, I was in Brussels attending a conference where Madame Albuquerque was on stage. I was absolutely impressed by her vision and the clarity of ideas, and I'm so honored to have to be the host of an event with Commissioner Albuquerque today here in Chișinău. Dear Deputy Prime Minister, former and future, distinguished guests, dear friends from embassies in Moldova, dear colleagues, dear friends, it is a great honor to welcome you to today's conference, gathering of vision, expertise, and commitment to the shared goal of building resilient, inclusive, and forward-looking economies. Here in Chișinău, we stand at the crossroad of transformation, not only for Moldova, but for the entire region. The choices we make today will define how firmly we anchor our economies in stability and how boldly we steer them towards sustainable prosperity. In today's rapidly changing economic environment, one of the greatest challenges faced by policymakers is to contribute to sustainable growth while preserving the soundness of the financial system, channeling savings to solid investments with multiplying effects. Central banks are contributing to ensuring price stability, financial stability, and strong supervision and regulation of the banking sector and non-bank financial institutions. Balancing these two imperatives, growth and stability, is not merely a matter of policy calibration, but of strategic vision. We must ensure that the financial sector continues to perform its core function of providing efficient financial intermediation, channeling savings into productive investments, fostering innovation, and supporting households and business alike. The task is far from being simple. The global economy is navigating an era of overlapping shocks, structural transformations, and heightened uncertainties. In this context, maintaining a resilient, well-capitalized, and well-governed financial system becomes not only a safeguard, but a catalyst for long-term development. A sound banking sector builds confidence, mobilizes resources, and enables economies to grow in a balanced and inclusive manner. At the National Bank of Moldova, we believe that financial stability is a non-negotiable precondition for sustainable and inclusive growth. It is the foundation upon which investment thrives, innovation unfolds, and citizens gain confidence in their future. Over the past few years, Moldova has faced multiple shocks, from geopolitical turmoil to supply chain disruptions and inflationary pressures. Yet, through prudent policies and a disciplined monetary stance, we have preserved stability and strengthened resilience. After a strong negative shock from energy prices at the beginning of this year, inflation is now firmly on a downward path, approaching its target ranging of 5% plus minus 1.5 percentage points. Inflation will remain in the corridor for the forecasting period. This is the result of a combined good, wise measures taken by the central bank by increasing policy rate and tightening monetary policy conditions, and by the government and the European Union providing timely compensations for the population. Therefore, at our most recent monetary policy meetings in August and September, the National Bank decided to lower the policy rate by 25 basis points each time to 6% per annum. This decision is more than a technical adjustment. It reflects our confidence in the trajectory of the Moldovan economy and our determination to keep inflation expectations anchored. Our recent GDP data confirm a more robust rebound than anticipated for 2025 and a better outlook for 2026. The revival of the agriculture sector and its ripple effects on exports are strengthening growth, easing the trade deficit, and reinforcing foreign exchange inflows. Recently, S&P Global Ratings has assigned Moldova a BB- rating with a stable outlook, placing us at the level with Armenia and South Africa and higher than Montenegro and Bosnia and Herzegovina. Behind these numbers lies a story of resilience, of people and institutions that refused to stand still. Despite the crisis, our banking system remains stable, well capitalized and well governed. For example, in June this year, the capital adequacy ratio stood at 25.6%, more than double than the prudential requirements. We are also intensifying reforms in the non-bank financial sector to aiming that insurance and microfinance institutions, also under supervision and regulation of the central bank, serve citizens and businesses with fairness, transparency, and quality. And our good governance is noted. Recently, an important investor from the EU decided to consolidate its position on the insurance sector by purchasing one of the largest companies in the sector. One of the most historic moments of our financial sector came this year with Moldova's accession to SEPA, the Single Euro Payments Area. The achievement is not just a technical upgrade, it is a symbol of trust, a validation of Moldova's reform journey, and a tangible benefit for our citizens and business. And today, 8 out of 10 banks are part of SEPA, and I have to present my congratulations and to say thank you to the banking sector, to the Banking Association, and special thanks to Mr. Dorel Noroc. We worked very hard together for this project. Thank you. For our diaspora families working and studied abroad, euro transfers are now faster, safer, and significantly cheaper. At remittances of up to 1.5 billion euros per year, savings would be up to 17 to 20 million euros. For our entrepreneurs, SEPA means equality of access and lower transaction costs. helping Moldova companies compete on a level playing field with their European counterparts. Savings on FDI and corporate transfers for around 10 billion euros per year would be up to 20 million euros. From now on, financial flows will be managed more effectively, securely, and at lower cost directly within the SEPA system. Moldova's European integration is not an abstract political goal. It is a practical pathway to prosperity. And Deputy Prime Minister Gerasimov, here with us today, will tell us more about this pathway. The National Bank of Moldova plays a key role on several areas, and I would name here economic and monetary policy, financial services, and free movement of capital. Also, we have the EU growth plan, amounting to 1.9 billion euros, that serves as catalyst for structural reforms, job creation, and private sector dynamism. These funds, coupled with Moldova's strong reform commitment, can help double our economy within the next decade, support the creation of over 5,000 new businesses, and help over 100,000 Moldovans find employment. But beyond the numbers, this plan is a promise to reform, a promise for integrity and partnership to lead to opportunity and hope. In the current changing environment, Europe's challenge is not to retreat, but to reinvent itself, to transform these opportunities, these uncertainties, into a new momentum for unity and competitiveness. And that momentum is now clearly on our side. The European project is being revitalized through initiatives that blend strategic autonomy with open markets, innovation, and shared prosperity. At the heart of this renewed vision lies the ambition to make Europe's financial framework simpler, faster, and more connected. This transformation seeks not only to modernize the way capital and savings move across borders, but also to restore confidence that financial regulation can enable growth rather than constrain it. A central pillar of this effort is the European Savings and Investment Union, a strategic initiative designed to unlock Europe's vast private savings and channel them into productive investments that drive innovation, job creation, and long-term growth. From the outset, simplification has been a trigger. The message from Europe's business community has been clear. Europe must become an easier place to do business without compromising financial stability. That is precisely the principle guiding this new generation of financial reforms. Equally important is the simplification and burden reduction agenda, a deep systemic effort to ensure that Europe's financial rules remain coherent. For Moldova, these European initiatives offer more than inspiration. They provide a roadmap for integration. As we align our legislation and institutions with the European Union acquis, we are not merely harmonizing our laws, we are building bridges into the European financial architecture, creating the foundation for greater access to capital, a more competitive business environment, and modern, secure financial services for citizens and companies. These measures, from omnibus packages simplifying sustainability and SME financing rules to the strengthening of the sustainable finance framework, are designed to keep Europe on course toward the goal of Green Deal, the digital transformation, and economic convergence. Our discussion today focuses on firm dynamics, transformation, and aggregate productivity growth, a subject as complex as it is vital. Ultimately, productivity is the outcome of renewal, of new firms entering the market, bringing ideas and technologies, and raise the standards for all. For Moldova, the challenge is to accelerate the virtuous cycle, to ensure that labor, capital, and innovation flow toward the most productive users. It requires policies that reward entrepreneurship, foster fair competition, and encourage digitalization, while allowing the market to renew itself. Access to finance remains a cornerstone of convergence. While credit to GDP remains below EU levels, SME lending has improved significantly, reflecting greater confidence and the banking sector's readiness to finance the real economy. European integration will further strengthen this dynamic, enabling longer-term credit lines, fixed rates, and broader guarantees for SMEs. And as we move toward open banking, entrepreneurs will gain access to tailored financial products and digital solutions that empower growth. At the heart of every successful transformation lies trust. We continue to strengthen central bank independence, rule-based supervision, and transparency, all essential pillars of the European financial architecture. We are building a financial system that citizens can trust and investors can rely on. Ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, what defines Moldova today is not its size or its geography. It is its determination to transform. We are moving from resilience to renewal, from stability to sustainable prosperity. Our journey is powered by partnership with our citizens, our private sector, and our European international allies. As we gather together to discuss finance and growth, let us remember that every reform, every innovation, and every courageous decision contributes to the story of a nation that believes in its future. Let this conference be more than a dialogue. Let it be a catalyst of convergence for a Moldova that grows stronger, fairer, and more connected to Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. Following Mrs. Drago's remarks, we are pleased to invite Mrs. Cristina Gerasimov, Deputy Prime Minister for European Integration of the Republic of Moldova, to join us with a word of greetings.
Good morning, everyone. It is a great pleasure and honor to be here at the invitation of Governor Drago and to have these opening remarks for a very important conference on finance and growth. In my capacity today representing the government of Moldova, I would like to speak not only about the lessons, but also, of course, about the opportunities. The opportunities that Moldova's EU accession process is opening not only for our economy, but of course for our people also. We meet just 4 weeks after achieving one of the most tangible milestones on our European path, the successful integration of the banking sector in the single euro payments area. And by joining SEPA, Moldova has become part of Europe's integrated payment ecosystem. Our citizens, our businesses can now send and receive euro payments across the EU with the same ease, with the same cost and speed as in any other member state of the EU. But this is more than a technical or procedural step for us. It is about belonging, about Moldova operating within the same trusted and efficient financial infrastructure that our European family already uses. And this success was possible thanks to the coordinated efforts of the National Bank, Governor Anca Drago herself, the commercial banking sector, and of course the government. It shows that when reforms are well planned, when they are consistently implemented, they deliver tangible results. Few topics are as central to our European path as the one we address today: how to turn the financial system into a genuine engine of productivity, of innovation, and convergence with the European Union. Looking back at the experiences of successful transition economies in not so far away Central and Eastern Europe, we see a very clear pattern. Financial sector is an essential facilitator of growth. For these countries, aligning their financial framework to the EU standards was not merely about regulation. It was about mobilizing capital for transformation. They used the accession process to reshape their economies by opening access to credit for small businesses, building trust through transparent supervision, and channeling savings into productivity and innovation. These are the messages that I got from all the former chief negotiators that I had the pleasure of inviting and hosting here in Moldova throughout the last 1 year and a half. Moldova is now following the same path with the same purpose, to make EU accession an economic facilitator, an economic accelerator. Our commitment to EU membership is, of course, inseparable from the modernization of financial architecture. EU accession for us means creating a financial system that, in addition to ensuring stability, rewards initiative, nurtures innovation, and supports the visions of entrepreneurs from the country, but also from beyond. And here I refer to our diaspora. We are aligning our national legislation with the EU's Capital Requirements Directive 5, with MiFID II, with PSD 2, with the anti-money laundering framework, ensuring that financial stability and transparency becomes the cornerstones of sustainable growth. At the same time, we're building the missing pieces that turn compliance into competitiveness, a capital market strategy and EU standards to diversify funding beyond bank lending, innovation financing tools, be it venture funds, equity guarantees, and blended instruments to bridge the financing gap for startups and high-growth SMEs. And of course, the modernization of supervisory institutions that Governor Dragu has already spoken about, ensuring risk-based oversight aligned with the European best practice, meaning also bureaucracy and compliance need to be as smart as they get to not hurt businesses, local citizens, or our diaspora. These are not abstract reforms, they're binding building blocks of our future participation in the EU single market. For Moldova, EU accession is also about closing the productivity gap. True convergence is not only about statistics, it is about people, about the farmer who can access credit to modernize his or her equipment, about the startup that secures seed capital to launch a new idea, or the family that can invest in education and housing with confidence in their future here at home without having to worry that maybe they need to leave abroad. Our firms must learn further to compete not through lower costs, but through higher value. That requires financial intermediation that rewards innovation and investment in technology. And here the growth plan that we have signed in May of this year will help us very much. Our goal is to transform finance from a constraint into a catalyst. That is why financial reform goes hand in hand with strengthening corporate governance and transparency standards, promoting green finance guided by the EU taxonomy to channel investments into sustainable sectors, and of course fostering a culture of entrepreneurial finance where proper risk management replaces risk avoidance. The lessons from previous enlargements, I think, are clear and consistent to everyone in this room. Sequencing matters a lot. Liberalization without proper regulation leads to instability, while the opposite leads to stagnation. Institutions matter a lot, and that is why we continue consolidating them. Independent and credible supervision is the backbone of investors' trust. And of course, last but not least, coordination matters equally as much. The most successful countries linked their financial reforms to broader strategies for industrial policy, innovation, and human capital. We're applying these lessons through the national program for the adoption of the acquis that we already adopted in May of this year for the next 4 years, or as we call it here in Moldova, the national program for accession to the EU, which integrates financial sector reforms across multiple negotiating clusters, from economic governance to competitiveness and digital transformation. Ladies and gentlemen, finance is often considered neutral, but in Moldova's case, it is also with political implications. Finance is often for every SME that gains better access to credit important, every startup that secures seed investment, and every citizen who transfers their money instantly across Europe. Each of these is a concrete expression of our European integration path. Our task is to ensure that by the time Moldova joins the European Union, our financial system is not merely compliant, it is competitive, it is resilient, and of course, inclusive. The coming years will define whether Moldova can move from stability to growth, from convergence on paper to convergence in living standards. The next chapter of Moldova's growth will go hand in hand with its preparation of becoming a EU member state. Our target is to close negotiations by the end of 2027. That would allow Moldova to become a member state by 2030. We're proving that Moldova can deliver, that Moldova is resilient, that small states like us can think big, that convergence is not just an aspiration, but also a strategic choice, and that the path to Europe is above all the path towards realizing our own potential as a country, as a European people, with determination and strong partnerships that we're grateful to have. I'm confident that we will succeed. I want to thank once again the National Bank of Moldova, the financial community, and all of our European partners for their constant dedication and cooperation, and I wish you all today fruitful discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Gerasimov, Deputy Prime Minister, for your valuable remarks and insights. We are now moving to our keynote address. It is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Luca Gattini, Head of the Economics Department at the European Investment Bank. Mr. Gattini will address a key topic for Moldova's development, financial markets and small and medium-sized enterprises, economist with a distinguished career spanning the European Investment Bank, the European Financial Stability Facility, and the European Central Bank. His work has covered crisis management, macro modeling, stress testing, firm-level data analysis, and housing market dynamics, all highly relevant to the challenges we examine today. Mr. Gattini, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the generous introduction, and thank you for inviting here, Governor. And, well, a lot have been said already in the two speeches, so I hope I can nicely complement them. So maybe let me start off explaining you a little bit what is the menu that I prepared for you today. Well, I have a presentation, which I hope it works. Let's test it. Yep. So first of all, I will start off with a couple of words on, let's say, convergence and finance, so the topic of today. And then I will move on to more the core of the presentation, so which is access to finance as perceived by the companies. So I will provide you a little bit of pieces of research that we did in the department, let's say regarding Moldova, but also regarding convergence regions, cohesion regions, as well as accession regions. And then I will move on, finally concluding with some actually in-house experience that we have on our own programs and the effects that they have on companies' performance. So let me start off with this slide. I hope you can see it. So this one shows something that probably you all know, more or less. On the left-hand side, we have actually the GDP per capita of various countries. Some of them are inside the European Union, others they are in the Western Balkans. There is also Moldova, of course, and in Eastern Partnership, and these are basically GDP per capita in PPP terms relative to the European Union average. This is an average of the recent past. What you can see is that actually the countries that are inside the European Union are not at the level of the EU average, but close to, while which are in green, all the other countries, they are, let's say, far more distant from that. And Moldova is, let's say, at the bottom of that. Now, this is where we stand today. At the same time, this indicates that there are massive, in fact, growth opportunities out there to be, let's say, taken up from the present to the future. Now, let me move on, if I may, to this slide. Now, a lot of dots here, but what I try to do here is to link two dimensions. On the x-axis, basically, is the past 25 years in convergence of countries. So how much basically the GDP per capita in PPP terms, so what I showed before, has been increasing over 25 years. And on the y-axis, the size, in this case, relative to GDP of the credit and how much of this has increased over the same period of time. So basically the y-axis shows not much only how much credit has increased in the single countries, but how much more the banking sectors have been penetrating the countries. So whether they have been increasing basically over and beyond the growth of GDP. Now, the good news is that all the countries, both inside the EU and in the accession and Eastern Partnership region, they are on the positive, quadrant, so which means that banking sectors in all countries have been penetrating the economies more than what the economy itself has been growing. In some countries more, in others less, and what we see is that there is a positive correlation between the two, which clearly links, the positive effects of, increasing financial penetration and intermediation with gains in economic welfare, let's say. At the same time, this you don't see it here, but I tell you that in all these countries, including Moldova, of course, the penetration of banking sector is still well below, so even in countries that are part of the European Union, and they are, let's say, the central cohesion region, they are below the average of the euro area. So even there is expected gains to be obtained. Now, moving to the core of the presentation, and therefore how it is access to finance as perceived by the firms. Here we'll do a blending of different, in fact, pieces of research that we did inside the department. So this first slide is more about, let's say, the main bottlenecks that are perceived by firms in running their own businesses and operations. These are the recent data. Maybe just, I will say it here and not to repeat it. I will compare, let's say, Moldova with Central Eastern Europe, which is called CE, which is nothing else than basically the countries that are cohesion countries inside the European Union today, with the Eastern Partnership, which excludes Moldova, which essentially in this case are Armenia, Georgia and Azerbaijan, and the Western Balkan countries, other accession. So what we see is that more or less in all these countries, in fact, the 5 main obstacles are the same. Now, access to finance is one of the 5. It's not actually the top, obstacle, but it's an important obstacle. Now, on the right-hand side, I look only at Moldova. And here there are some good news, actually. We compared basically 2 different draws of the survey of the last 5 years, 2019, actually, and 2024. And we looked at what were the changes, in these obstacles. The good news is that actually some of the obstacles that are more related, let's say, to the operating environment other than access to finance, they've been improving, which is what you have on the left-hand side of the right-hand side chart. For example, corruption is much less of an obstacle today. Informal sector competition is much less of an obstacle today in Moldova. Political instability is perceived by firms as much less of an obstacle. And this, I couldn't find a place to show you here, but actually these improvements are specific of Moldova, and you cannot find the same very improvements, in fact, in other Western Balkans or Eastern Partnership countries. So this is very good news. At the same time, when, well, the name there, purely educated workforce, it means essentially there is a mismatch between what there is the demand in the market, you know, and what is the supply. This is, unfortunately, got worse in Moldova, but this actually is a pattern that we see in all the regions that I'm mentioning here. So it's not single of Moldova, let's say. Access to finance. Well, it was an obstacle in 2019, is still an obstacle today. And in fact, as perceived by the firms, did not change much. Neither improved, not deteriorated. So it's still there. Now, let's maybe then delve into a little bit more detail on what does this mean in practice for companies. So, first of all, there is a large chunk of companies, and this is what you see on the left-hand side here, that need loans. On average, across regions, and Moldova is not an exception, between 40 and 50% of the companies declare that they need loans. Mid-chart here, and I will explain you a little bit later what we mean with credit constraints. Out of these companies needing loans, again, give or take half, depending on the region, depending on the places. And Moldova, in this case, actually less than other regions reported here. But these companies, they are credit constrained. So basically, they would like a loan, they don't get it, or they don't apply for it. They're discouraged. In fact, the vast majority are discouraged. It's not that they were rejected by the banking sector. On the right-hand side, which I think is also quite of a telling statistic, these are companies, so the red ones, so roughly, for example, in Moldova it's 30%, and it's higher than in Central Eastern Europe or in the Western Balkans. These are companies that they do not have credit and they don't want it. So meaning that these are companies that, and they never had it. So they don't have it in their track record, yeah? So they never accessed finance. Now, this is just a picture, let's say a snapshot, and now we'll try to link these features with companies' performance in the next slides. So growth, employment, etc. Maybe just two more words in clarifying what we mean with discouragement. So firms that they did not apply for a loan, then they also say why they didn't, you know? They didn't because well, they faced, or they believed that they could face unfavorable rates given their investment plans. They didn't because procedures were complex or perceived as complex in the banks. They didn't because of fear of rejection. They didn't also because of collateral requirements, or perceived collateral requirements. Now, we looked a little bit more into collateral requirements. We tried to link it, which is what you see on the right-hand side, to their investment propensity of the same firms. And what we see is that actually the higher is the perception of too constraining, let's say, collateral requirements or demands, the lower is the propensity of investing of firms. So there is actually a nexus between how much collateral is asked by banks and the propensity in a given country or in a given region, the propensity of firms to invest. Now, moving on to what I promised earlier, so meaning linking finance to the performance of firms. On the left-hand side here, we have basically chunked down what we call autarkic firms, are the firms that I mentioned earlier. So the zero leverage, so those that they do not have any, they have a relationship maybe with a bank, but they do not have any liability relationship, so meaning they don't have any contracted debt, or they never contracted any debt. What you see here is that so we split them between the firms investing and the firms not investing, of these, zero leverage ones. The pattern is rather clear. Okay, they are all somewhat investing, some of them, but essentially the vast majority of the zero leverage firms, they do not invest. They operate, but they do not engage into medium long-term investment. They do not have by their own choice, by the way, access to finance. On the central part of this chart, I show you the relationship between basically finance and employment growth in the firms. So here you have firms in red that applied for a loan and actually got it, and in blue, firms that they did not apply for a loan for whatever reason, because they were discouraged, because they didn't want credit, etc., etc. And what you see, it's a clear pattern, even more in Moldova, but more or less across the region, that the firms that they got access to credit, they applied and they got it, on average, they generated higher employment growth. On the right-hand side, if I did not convince you enough of the link between, let's say, credit and growth of companies, there is another way of looking at the issue. So there are two lines there, one blue, one red. So what we did, we chunk companies by their age, which is what you have on the x-axis. So from 0, so newly born companies, to actually very, established companies in the economies. What we see is that, well, all companies, in fact, operating as they grow with the age, they grow in size, which is the y-axis there. Okay, so they are bigger. However, those companies that they, in their lifetime, they got access to credit, so they wanted credit and they got it, on average, in each age bucket, they are larger than the companies that throughout their lifetime, they decided or not to access credit. So basically, they grew more. Yeah? Now, moving on, again, another yet topic that has been mentioned in the previous two speeches and very important for long-term growth is innovation. So what we did, we looked at also innovation patterns of firms and tried to elicit a little bit whether there is a link between innovation and some form of, propensity to be linked with the external environment of firms as well as access to finance. So on the left-hand side, we essentially chunked down firms into groups of firms that are more, let's say, outward-looking. And here you have three categories. One is called GVC, global value chains. One is called importer, and one is non-trader. So basically, we looked at firms that are part of global value chains, firms that are linked to the external environment, but are mainly, maybe not solely, but mainly importers, and firms that actually they are purely domestically inward-oriented. Their business is only run internally. They don't import, they don't export, at least directly. So what we see, and is what you have on the y-axis, is that the more firms are outwardly focused, the higher is their propensity to innovate. On the right-hand side, we did more or less the same, but looking at basically the linkages that intercore between the firms and the financial sector, or not, and their propensity to innovate. So what we see again, it's kind of a clear pattern, above all in Moldova, also in the other countries, but in Moldova it's very strong, in fact, that the firms that they are linked to the financial sector, meaning that they have a loan or multiple loans that have been approved for finance, they are actually much more, their propensity to innovate is much higher. As you move down, let's say, in the ladder of disconnectivity from the financial sector, so constrained firms, which would be the orange bar, their propensity to innovate is lower. It's not that they don't innovate. And when we talk about innovation here, by the way, it doesn't mean that you are the new unicorn in the world, right? So it just means that you invented maybe a new process which can be maybe not completely new to the entire world, but it can be new to the sector or the segment where the company operates into, okay? Just to be clear. So it's a kind of a broad concept of innovation. And then when you move to the so-called autarkic firms or the zero leverage, Basically, their propensity to innovate is still there, but it's very, very, very little. So, yet again, one last bit on equity financing. So some bright colleagues of mine, they ran actually a very nice paper where they tried to link basically the environment where the firms operate in, using, in any case, microdata, and their propensity to innovate again. So first of all, let me talk about the left-hand side. So actually, in terms of equity financing per se. So they tried to see whether there is a pattern or not between companies accessing equity financing and the environment where they operate into. First, they looked at the GDP per capita of countries, and there actually they did not find, they looked at a very broad spectrum of countries, they did not find very much of a correlation between accessing equity and the GDP per capita of countries. But then they looked at more the other aspects of the countries, which are very topical to the discussion of today. One is the capital market size and the integration of the capital markets, domestic capital markets, with other capital markets. And there, they started to see that actually the countries that they are more integrated and they have a larger size of the capital markets, well, their companies, they have a higher propensity to finance themselves via equity. Now, moving to the last part there, actually, this is more of a domestic, let's say, concept. So the second one here is more like internationalization. The third one is more domestic. So how deep are the capital markets in single economies? An example of the indicators that they use there, it's, let's say, IPOs relative to GDP, pre-IPOs, which would be basically venture capital relative to GDP, etc. Yet again, there, the larger are these markets domestically, the higher is the propensity of firms to finance themselves via equity. Then they moved to the right-hand side and they tried to see essentially comparing, how to say, let's say that you go to a doctor and you got a prescription, take the pill, don't take the pill. So basically there they looked at firms that they got financing via equity, they got the pill, and firms that they did not get the pill. They did not got financing via equity. But they were similar in many other dimensions, okay? What they see is that actually the firms that they got the pill, well, they have, so equity, they are much more likely to invest in general, but notably, they are much more likely to innovate. So they were able to establish, in this case, more of a causal link between innovation and the type of financing that firms get. If you're not convinced enough of this link between finance and growth, I have for you some more evidence coming out from our own financing programs that we run in different countries. So basically we made use of our own data and on data on our own companies that we financed. So what you see here on the, essentially we can do it because we follow always the money, so in a sense that we follow the money from our inception of the program to the last SME that gets our financing. So on the left-hand side, what you see is another piece of research, actually, of bright colleagues of mine, where they compared companies that they got access to our lines of credit to companies which are identical in many respects, except the fact, so again, got the pill, not got the pill in this case, which would be an EIB pill. So companies that they did not get it, and what they see is that actually the companies that they got access to financing, they've been performing after getting access to financing, they've been performing better in many, not all, but in many dimensions listed here. So in terms of employment growth, in terms of profitability, but profitability not really, but more productivity, in terms of intangible investments, and so forth and so on. So this is what we call, generally speaking, impact. So this is what we kind of quantify, the impact. It's a way of quantifying the impact of our programs. Moving on the right-hand side, well, we did a further analysis. We actually looked at what here we label additionalities. So we took, again, all the companies, but then we focused on the convergence regions there, vis-a-vis all the other regions. As you know, we operate globally. We operate largely inside the European Union, but then we focused essentially advanced, let's say, European Union countries versus cohesion and accession countries there. And what we see is that comparing our own financing, okay, of companies in more mature economies to our own financing to companies in more, let's say, accession or cohesion regions, we see additionality. So meaning that in many of the dimensions that I listed before, the impact is even larger and stronger for cohesion and accession countries. And this is what we call additionality. Last but not least, on another product of ours, venture debt. So it's more like kind of a patient type of financing, which can turn into equity, in fact. So again, we did a similar type of analysis. Now I don't bother you with all the details, but what we see there is that after the firms, they got access to financing of this type, well, they basically report total assets that are a third higher than companies that they did, similar companies that they did not get this instrument. They produced a greater value added, they show an increase in turnover, but also notably we see also a crowding in effect. So meaning that the same very companies, they actually ended up being also more leveraged, not thanks to our own financing, but there has been a kind of a crowding in. So they were able to attract financing also from third-party sources. With this, I more or less conclude. Maybe let me talk a little bit about implications, potential implications of this analysis. You already heard, I think, many of these from the previous two speeches. I have, I guess, a couple of minutes. So, first of all, what I will say here, it's a little bit, it's kind of a list of, I would say, prerequisites, let's say, to support sustainable growth and productivity enhancements. So I hope, first of all, that I convinced you more or less of the link between finance, company growth, employment, investment, and innovation propensity. There are still some clear limiting factors to this. Some of them are more linked, let's say, to bank financing per se, such as, for example, unfavorable rates, complex procedures, application procedures, fear of rejections of companies, and collateral requirements. Now, there are different ways to tackle this. One could be, for example, via TAs to banks, but also to companies. So in a sense that it shouldn't be only one-way road. TAs can include enhance the credit risk assessment to better differentiate across clients. And this should help also to increase client accessibility and outreach, and notably for the underserved sectors or segments. Financial literacy to companies in this case. It's very important to increase their capacity and, but also I would say, really confidence basically in engaging with the financial sector. And to decrease what I was referring to before as autarky or zero leverage, element. Then I would say that also for companies, improving audit and accounting standards, so in terms of doing TA for this, it's paramount to basically, in a sense, increase again their appetite, but also their bankability for the banking sector. Then, when it comes to rates, but also I would say the lifetime of the assets, to be financed, favorable long-term financing is always the backbone, and it's a paramount element. Guarantee schemes, important products to basically increase the risk appetite, the risk-taking appetite of banks, of the financial sector, but also to decrease, let's say, the collateral requirements on companies. These, of course, are financial instruments. From an infrastructural standpoint, they cannot do the whole job. They need to go hand in hand with, enhancement of improvements in resolution procedures, out-of-court settlements, reforms to basically make the execution of collateral better and faster. Now, collateral regimes also are important, reforms in collateral regimes, but also I would then move on to other even more broader, let's say, structural issues, which is the deepening of capital markets to increase basically the availability of risk finance and to link it to innovation, for example. Increase the saving capacity across border, it's very important to support, yet again, example, innovation, and the further integration of banking sector seems to be paramount, essentially, to, determining long-term growth patterns. I stop here, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Catini. We now turn to our first panel discussion, which addresses two important questions for Moldova's economic future. How do firm dynamics and creative destruction drive aggregate productivity growth? And what are the pathways for structural transformation and convergence with the EU? To guide this discussion, I'm pleased to introduce Mrs. Svetlana Cerovic, IMF resident representative in Moldova, who will moderate this panel. Also, the experts, Ulrich Schmidt, World Bank Country Manager for Moldova, Giuseppe Grimaldi, Head of Office Moldova EBRD, Mihnea Constantinescu, Deputy Governor of the National Bank of Moldova, and Salom Will, Policy Analyst, OECD.
Good morning. Okay. Good morning, everybody, from my side as well. So welcome to this first panel of this workshop today. It is great pleasure to moderate this discussion with an outstanding group of panelists that are joining me here. So as Moldova advances on its EU accession path, I think that this dialogue today offers a great opportunity to explore and discuss how country can accelerate on its accession path, and how it can accelerate its economic convergence towards the EU. So why do we talk that much about convergence? Why do we think it is important? Well, actually, I will pick up on what the Deputy Prime Minister just said in her opening remarks. She said that convergence is not only about statistics, it is about people. And exactly, why we want to talk about convergence was first, it is important for the country to get closer to EU income levels, and in that process to improve living standards of its population. But equally important in this is to, through the convergence process, to set the country on a sound footing, so that once the country joins the EU, it can benefit more from the single European market. And for this, productivity is a key driver for the real economic convergence, and that is why the topic of our today's panel is productivity and convergence. And I think here we have a great mix of experience and expertise. that will help us shed some light on this important nexus between productivity and convergence towards the EU levels. But I would like to start this discussion, or to focus this discussion on something that usually is, I think it is not much explored or discussed in Moldova, and that is this issue, the topic of firm dynamics, and what we like to call it creative distraction as an important element of convergence and productivity growth. As in the end of the day, the aggregate production of a country is the result of these firm level forces. And evidence show that firms that are entering the market, these new firms, are usually more productive than the average. This is usually because they bring new technology, new innovative ideas, new managerial practices, and so on. At the same time, the firms that are exiting the market, those that go bankrupt, that are liquidated, and so on, they tend to be less productive. So if this dynamic, this creative distraction works well, then on average, the productivity of country will improve, increase, and therefore the growth, the economy will grow faster. So the main question that I would like here to discuss is actually how can Moldova strengthen these mechanisms and help that way to accelerate the growth and facilitate the convergence. So maybe I can start with you, Mihna, as a host, semi-host. So let me start with you with a general question, but I also invite others to step in with their thoughts. So how do you see this business dynamics, firm entering, exiting, resource allocation patterns, how they're evolving in Moldova? What do you see as main factors that are determining it? And what role do you think that can play in this convergence towards the EU?
Hi. We published a study this year that complements what Luca was saying. Luca looked at the World Enterprise Survey data that was asking firms. We ran a survey and we asked Moldovan banks, how do they perceive the request for funds, for financing, and so on and so forth. So we looked at both sides. And one of the things that the banks mentioned was the lack of financial history. And this is where, unfortunately, a shadow economy penalizes dramatically. We think you save some taxes, you actually cut yourself off from the banking system. But they also mentioned the lack of expertise in presenting a business plan. Many small, medium-sized enterprises generally might not have the capacity or the experience to say, I'll present this nicely drafted 3-page report on what my product is supposed to be. And these are, in a sense, very complicated problems to solve simply because they're not in someone's backyard directly in terms of policy. In a developed market, this is built through the university system, through entrepreneurial startup culture, and so on and so forth. You go maybe to a multinational company where you learn a lot of these skills. And once you move to build your own company, you already have them. You don't necessarily need to go to a particular class. You don't have an academy that teaches this. And here we're stuck in the middle because we cannot implement these programs in a sense of giving these skills to the companies so that they present better plans and they understand the risks and they understand the competition that they're facing or the markets that they want to enter and so on and so forth. So I think on the entry side, there's things that have to do with finance, and we've seen finance is a concern, but it's not the biggest. What Luca also showed us is that next year's conference has to be about labor markets. And I think the most important part has to do with understanding how the labor code prevents firms from hiring. If you're afraid that you're putting up money to start up something and try something that you're not sure it will work, you don't want to tie yourself to at least 1-2 years of contract, no possibility to fire or no possibility to lay off and so on and so forth. So flexibility there is going to be very, very important. on the entry side. Then, of course, it depends very much from industry to industry, because the banks will be able to value collateral such as land very easily. But if somebody comes and says, I have the next ChatGPT, maybe the bank might not have a loan officer that understands this type of technology. And again, here we have to decide, we want to take an approach to build some key priority industries and create in small the entire ecosystem, so that it's not just about the money, because at the end of the day, access to finance seems not to be the most important part. On the exiting part, there's lots to be done, of course. Again, that same labor code I mentioned and labor practices are not helping companies easily exit. I think we still have a legacy of state-owned enterprises that absorb a lot of capital and labor. Both World Bank reports, OECD reports discuss for Moldova the lack of allocative efficiency. This is the ability of the market to match capital and labor to those firms that have high productive activity. In our case, unfortunately, labor and capital goes to low productivity firms. So we're stuck in this circle. On the exit side, I might mention, for example, especially when you think about financial companies, you already mentioned, I think it was there before on the slides, on Luca's slide, the ability to execute collateral as much as possible, as fast as possible. If you go to courts, if you start the entire process as a foreign investor and you think, I'm going in, maybe I can do it, maybe I won't, but if I get stuck in court for 4 years, I don't want to go in. So the entry and the exit is an entire cycle that a foreign investor would look at, and each element has to be, in a sense, optimized to enable this. We have pieces of legislation that might not be very clear on this, on the insurance maybe side, on the financial capital market side. Capital gets stuck in limbo because you might not have your license to perform some particular action, but you cannot completely liquidate until certain things have been matched. So I think there's a host of issues. Some of them have been very well identified. I think we just have to nicely prioritize and understand how we can accelerate this process of entry and exit.
Thank you, Mihna. Just following up on this, what you just said, and actually I want to turn to Ulrich. So Mihna already mentioned some of the barriers that he sees in the whole bottlenecks that he sees in the whole this process. How do you see it? How does that compare Moldova to other transitional countries? And especially from your side, maybe on the barriers that prevent firms to enter the market. Mihna mentioned that some of them, but I believe that World Bank did quite a bit studies in that area. So please.
Yeah, thank you. I hope I can add something to the details already. Let me just say one qualification. I speak on the basis of a lot of analytical work that the World Bank has done, and I just wanted to say something about the creative destruction. This is really firmly established as the dynamism and mechanism to drive sustainable growth. And it's a dynamic that relies on entry and exit of firms, of growth of firms based on technology and innovation. And if you look at the very big picture, the US, this process of creative destruction is way ahead if you compare it with Europe as a whole. And when it comes to Moldova, this process is really not functioning yet, and I think that's one of the big topics to address. For example, you have about 13,000 active firms in Moldova per 1 million inhabitants. It's roughly half the level of what you have in Romania and much less in Slovenia as a comparison. When we talk about creative destruction, we have to talk about a dominant state-owned enterprise sector that is still in existence in Moldova, and we can talk about this a little bit later. But we have also found, instead of a creative destruction process in Moldova, you see improvements, slight improvements within existing firms. And given that these firms can be less productive than the productivity frontier, There's also a misallocation of labor that is going into less productive sectors in existing firms. So these are all structural issues that need to be looked at. If you look a bit at the examples in other European or Eastern European transition countries, many of the ECA countries have faced or facing similar structural challenges. But in most of the transition economies, productivity growth has been driven by the reallocation from relatively less productive sectors to relatively more productive sectors. So that's really the process of structural transformation these countries have relied on. And as I said, in Moldova, the gains stem really from increases or improvements within existing firms, and if these firms are not on the productivity frontier, you have these negative impacts on the labor misallocation. And in the most successful transition economies, it's really innovation that has propelled productivity growth. While at the same time, and you have mentioned this already, the less inefficient incumbents have exited. So in contrast, Moldova has really high regulatory barriers to entry and access, and with an overall weak competition policy framework as we see it. So there's a lot of work to be done. If I can just list a few of the barriers, one is really the complex regulatory requirements and the high indirect cost, the long waiting times for permits, frequent inspections, the difficulties to enter and exit the market, which makes starting a business challenging. Then we talked a lot and we heard a lot about access to finance, which is a major or still a big hurdle, particularly with higher collateral requirements. And what I would like to highlight in particular is the skilled shortages and the mismatch between what firms require in terms of skills and what the education, particularly the tertiary education system, puts out in Moldova. And then another important area and a barrier to the private sector is the underdeveloped infrastructure. There's a big infrastructure connectivity agenda, physical infrastructure, roads, transport, as well as digitalization. And then finally, I would like to highlight again that the relative dominance of SOEs in the economy that discourage overall private sector investments because it distorts the product margins. Thank you.
So both of you did mention this reallocation of resources as an extremely important element of this process. So Salome, if I can turn to you. As they said, resource allocation is very important, but very often it happens that it does not go from less productive to more productive areas. So from your perspective, how do you see it? How can Moldova create a more business dynamic environment that will encourage this reallocation of resources and that would foster productive entrepreneurship and enable in particular small and medium-sized enterprises to realize their full potential as drivers of growth?
Thank you. Just a quick word first to thank once again the National Bank of Moldova for the invitation. To the question, maybe to start by setting the scene on the SME sector currently in Moldova. We've been seeing interesting trends in recent years. If you look at employment, for instance, SME's share in employment is around 65% now, which is on par with EU levels. But then, if you look at SME's contribution to turnover, for instance, here there is a persisting gap. So that highlights once again the untapped potential to raise productivity. In terms of sectoral structure, SMEs are still concentrated in the wholesale and retail trade sector, but this share is also decreasing. So, and we see, for instance, more and more firms entering the ICT sector, So all that to say that there is a gradual shift towards more knowledge-intensive activities, which is encouraging. Now the question is, how do we build on this and how do you accelerate the trend? Because as we've heard, ultimately, Moldova's growth, just to repeat it once again, will depend on how effectively resources are allocated and moving from low-performing firms to higher value-added sectors. Now, we at the OECD have been working with Moldova for over 15 years now on different policy areas, including competition, SOE governance, several topics that were already mentioned, but also SME policies. Some of you might be familiar with our reports. We have notably the OECD SME Policy Index, which we publish every 4 years, and which is basically a benchmarking tool assessing Moldova and other Eastern partner countries against EU and international best practices. So we published the last one last year, financed by the European Union. And I want to highlight first, because we're talking about room for improvement, of course, but I want to highlight that Moldova has made significant progress on different areas. So to give you an idea, we assess 12 policy dimensions related to SMEs, and between 2020 and 2024, Moldova improved on 11 out of these 12 policy dimensions. So the progress is clear. Among the highlights, we've been seeing a more favorable operational environment for firms, for instance, more and more e-government services. There is also progress. We heard about skills shortages, but we're seeing some interesting initiatives to foster an entrepreneurial culture early on, also more and more trainings for SMEs, including on new in-demand topics like digitalization. And then internationalization, support to internationalization is also stepping up. And one last highlight I want to emphasize, Moldova is top performer in the region on policies for SME greening, which is also a welcome step. Now, as we've said, there is room for improvement. I won't talk too much about innovation because we heard about it already, but perhaps two areas that merit particular attention. One is SMEs' participation in public procurement, and the second one, to also echo the first question to other panelists, bankruptcy and second chance frameworks. Because we speak about support to new entrants, which is of course of paramount importance, but supporting honest entrepreneurs who failed once but might want to restart is also essential for this creative destruction process. Now, we have policy recommendations on each and every area, but to give you 5 high-level, let's say, policy options for the way forward for this more creative and productive business environment. The first one is simply ensure implementation of key policy documents, because we've been seeing that Moldova is creating really a more and more sound policy framework. I'm thinking here about SPAC, about the National Digital Strategy, for instance. But we've seen with some of the previous policy documents that sometimes implementation lagged, for instance, the previous National Digital Strategy. So this is a caveat to keep in mind and try and address. The second one is to boost SME competitiveness by enabling firms to access resources throughout the entire life cycle. So, of course, starting by fostering an entrepreneurial culture early on, then supporting new entrants, and then helping firms scale up and access new markets. Here I'm thinking, for instance, about women entrepreneurs specifically, because we're seeing support for women who want to start a business, but then more could be done to help them expand, especially internationalize, for instance. And then up to frameworks to enable firms in financial distress to exit and then perhaps restart with a new idea. Then 3, further support the digital transformation of SMEs. 4 would be more, we are a data-driven organization, more data collection, like really systemic, reliable data. Again, there's been progress in that regard, but in many policy dimensions, data is still relatively scarce. Yet we know it's essential to inform policies, but also, and I want to emphasize this, to track impact of policies, which really brings me to my last point: ensure monitoring and evaluation of policy measures, of policy programs. More and more is being done on monitoring from what we are seeing, but impact evaluation is really the way forward. This is also something that we at the OECD are currently discussing with ODA, for instance, and other international partners involved on the topic. So with that in mind, I think Moldova could further move from reforms on paper to results on the ground.
Thank you so much. So a lot still to be done, but thanks for flagging all these very important elements of it. So maybe if I can, while staying still on resource reallocation, Giuseppe, if I can turn to you, and that is something that was touched by both Mihna and Ulrich, is the government role looking on SOEs. As we already heard, here in Moldova, the SOE sector is still very large, and would addressing that part help channel resources from less to more productive ones?
Thank you very much, Svetlana, and let me start also to express my gratitude to the National Bank for the invitation to this high-level event. And I'm really happy to take this question about, let's say, economic governance more broadly. This is one of the priority areas for the EBRD in the next 5 years. And I would start by saying, sometimes, we think about governance, and it's a bit of a difficult to define argument and to make it concrete. But actually, my very first point would be that governance is priced. There's a price that comes with governance. If you adopt robust fiscal rules, you can cut, for example, the sovereign spreads at the national level. At company level, if you improve the corporate governance, then you have access to lower cost of capital. So this is very concrete. It has material effects on productivity. The effects are a bit indirect because the lower risk premium basically decrease the cost of capital, and then better rules, improve capital allocation and discipline, which altogether then lifts investment, productivity, and growth. There are also some direct efficiency gains. They come from procurement, for example, it was mentioned before, or stronger boards. If we look at the situation in Moldova, this was mentioned already by all the other panelists, I think we see that the Moldovan government has a bit of a larger than average role to play in the economy. We see this happening quite often in other transition countries, especially those coming from the post-Soviet space. This is usually a legacy, but nevertheless, it's really important to tackle this aspect and to reform the large SOE sector to unlock, scarce resources which are in the country and shift government programs to support those innovative firms that are essential for long-term growth. In Moldova, we see that the SOE sector is a bit of an impediment at the moment in terms of resource allocation, and also has some distortive market effect in the sense that many sectors are still heavily dominated by the state. If we think about even strategic industries like energy, telecoms, transports, and this sort of market dominance really creates a preferential treatment that prevent competition and prevent the entry of private sector, high productivity, and basically growth in the mid and long term. These SOEs are often financially weak and not profitable, so this in turn also creates another side effect, which is basically they attract a lot of subsidies and direct support from the state, which again is a drain on public resources that should and could be reinvested in infrastructure bottlenecks, education, or innovation support. And I think in particular, another topic that was mentioned before was about labor allocation, and I think that's really relevant. Just by having all of these SOEs in a small market like Moldova that is really constrained in terms of capacity, you just have a constraint in terms of allocating labor to the highest productivity growth because they are stuck a bit within the SOEs industries. And just to give you a couple of examples of how the bank is trying to engage in Moldova to unlock this situation. So I have two examples. One is a bit the work that we try to do at systemic level. And that's what the work we are doing with the Public Property Agency, or APP in Romanian, the abbreviation. We've been working with them on a triage exercise. That's what it's called. That's when basically you look at each and every single company in the portfolio, SOEs, which have been consolidated in the Public Property Agency, basically trying to answer the question, what shall we do with this company? Is this a strategic asset that the state wants to retain for strategic reason? Is this, a non-profitable asset? Is this something that could be privatized? So we're trying to help this very fundamental review of the SOE, let's say, space through our reform support team, which are embedded in the agency. And in parallel to this top-down approach, we also engage, let's say, bottom-up at company level when we do have deals that are with SOEs. So, for example, with Molda Electrica in the context of the power transmission investment, we also have a corporate governance action plan, which is to basically improve the governance in the company and increase it to best practice, international practice. Just to conclude, I think the timing for these reforms is critical. There is an SOE strategy in Moldova, which is until 2030, and this is somehow reflected also in the EU conditionality. So I think there is really an opportunity to tackle now these reforms in order to improve the investor confidence into the country. And by doing that, this is not a compliance exercise, but it's really unlocking private sector, blended finance, potentially PPPs, and really contribute to the growth agenda.
Thank you very much, and I cannot agree more with you that timing is really critical here. Ulrich, turning back to you, you did mention in first intervention the importance of competition policy and regulatory framework. Can you elaborate a bit more on this one, how important it is, and where do you see the main weaknesses?
Let me start with a quick remark on the convergence, because it's important there's a time dimension to that. And we have done modeling on convergence. If Moldova stays in its current economic model and growth will be in the range of 3%, convergence will take up to 2070. But if growth moves beyond 5%, and all of these reforms we're talking about are going in this direction, if growth moves above 5%, Moldova can achieve convergence with EU incomes within a generation. The estimate is about 2040 or so. So I just wanted to highlight this, that this is not just abstract reforms that can be done at some point of time, but there's a real timeline to that if the ambitions of convergence are to be achieved. On the competition policy, I think there are two big buckets we could recommend or look at for Moldova to tackle. One is the accelerating market contestability and the structural transformation we have talked about. And the second one is to deepen within firm upgrading and innovation. And the first bucket, it's really straightforward to reduce the barriers to entry and exit. That means to streamline business registration, the insolvency and bankruptcy procedures, and applying the laws that are in place, and to make it easier for firms to enter and for unproductive firms to exit at the same time. Second is really tackling the preferential treatment of SOEs, as you have mentioned, and improve SOE governance. We call this competitive neutrality. And this means also separating the commercial and non-commercial functions and activities, especially you mentioned the energy sector. I think we have other sectors as well. And increasing transparency and looking then to restructuring or even privatization. And I know that Moldova has done the triage of SOEs in the past. We would like to see that process going forward with added and a new commitment. The second on deepening within firm upgrading and innovation, it's government policy to support technology adoption. Moldova lacks in adopting foreign technologies, so supporting research and development and encouraging firms to seek international certifications could help bringing that technology and knowledge into the country. In parallel, there's a need to upgrade management skills in the business sector. So there's space for programs on management training, digital skills acquisition, vocational education. And our evidence shows that with better management practices and skilled workers, firms are much more likely to innovate and to grow. And one important mechanism to do that is also foreign direct investment, because foreign direct investment often comes with the foreign knowledge and with the technology and helps to allow Moldovan firms to acquire this knowledge and technology. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ulrich. Salome, can I turn back to you again? I know you did a lot of work on several countries regarding digitalization and its importance in higher productivity and growth. How do you see it here in Moldova, and how do you see its importance for them?
Thank you. I'll just quickly react to what was said on SOE governance first before moving to digitalization, just to say that I really second what Giuseppe and Ulrich said. This triage mechanism is really a welcome step, but implementation, we're waiting to see the actual implementation, and in that sense also building the capacity of the PPA it was one of our finding and recommendation. But I stick to digitalization. We can discuss more after. So on digitalization, and it's important, I mean, I think it's very clear today that digitalization is no longer nice to have. It's really a must-have. It's a prerequisite for competitiveness. And I'm saying this for firms, of course, but also for individuals. I mean, it determines who is going to keep up and who risks falling behind. The second point I want to start with is that digitalization should never be an end, always a means towards greater goals, competitiveness, productivity, internationalization, you name it. Now, if we look at OECD evidence and research, of course, we see that firms who have adopted digital tools gain several points, percentage points in productivity, but they are also more resilient to shocks. And we've seen that during the COVID-19 crisis, for instance, firms who were digitally enabled suffered shorter and smaller scale sales declines, but also they recovered faster. And I think for a small and open economy like Moldova, it really means that digitalization is not only a driver for productivity, it's also, to some extent, a shock mitigation policy to increase resilience in these, unfortunately, increasingly uncertain times. So, where does Moldova stand in terms of these digitalization policies? I mean, if we look at digitalization of the private sector, at the OECD, we usually look at two main directions. One is framework conditions for the digital transformation, basically the enabling environment. And then the other one is targeted support for firms and especially SMEs. Now, on framework condition, I mean, first, in both directions, Moldova has been making clear and quick progress. On framework conditions, I've mentioned e-government services that are increasing rapidly, the national digital strategy, but I'm also thinking about the efforts to align with EU standards on roaming, electronic communication, data governance. And these reforms really matter because they reduce transaction costs for firms and make it easier for them to grow and expand. Now, on these 2 points can be considered in particular to build on this momentum. One that we haven't mentioned yet is stakeholder coordination. This is really crucial to make sure reforms are implemented and effectively implemented. So coordination between the government, the ministries, the agencies, but also with non-governmental stakeholders. And the second point is digital security. We know Moldova is increasingly the target of cyber attacks, and oftentimes also OECD research also shows in general in OECD countries that SMEs are the weak link in the digital security chain. So really helping firms understand both the benefits but also the risks associated with digital tools would help build their trust in the digital environment, but also more generally strengthen the country's digital resilience. And then on targeted support for SMEs, I have to say that if you look at the Eastern Partnership region, Moldova is a regional leader with the SME digitalization programs. It's really the first instance we've seen in the region when ODA started it in 2020. So that was really a very welcome step. Now, to build on this, I would say perhaps 3 key policy options to consider. One, build on the existing programs that ODA has, but there is also several private sector initiatives that are worth mentioning. In that regard, I would particularly emphasize the need for more advisory support, because firms still struggle to understand, especially in traditional sector, outside Chișinău, and to really understand what digitalization can bring. And if you allow me to draw to other recent OECD research, basically we have OECD colleagues conducting regularly this survey of SMEs in OECD countries. And the last one was released just a few months ago. And one of the key findings was that the surveyed firms in OECD countries, 80% of the surveyed firms were not aware of government support. So awareness raising is also particularly important. Then the second point is further customization of the support services. And here I'm thinking about sector-specific approaches, because we know that digitalization does not allow for one-size-fits-all approach. Different sectors have different needs. And one of the good practice examples we have identified in OECD countries, but also outside, I'm actually thinking about Singapore, which is a bit far away, but a very interesting example. They have these sectoral digitalization roadmaps. Basically, they assess the digital maturity of different sectors, and then they develop step-by-step recommendations for firms in that given sector to go digital. And of course, they list the available resources to do so. So that's always an interesting example we like quoting. And my last point would be on, we've talked again about digital skills, so I'll echo that, digital skills and digital literacy. That's really a key aspect. Digital transformation is only as strong as the skills behind it. And again, to quote some OECD evidence, we have recent surveys showing that the productivity benefits of digitalization depend on complementary assets, so really the people behind it. So investing in digital skills is essential, and when I say digital skills, it's generic basic skills, advanced skills, but also complementary skills. What we call complementary digital skills are not the technical ones, but problem solving, communication, managerial skills as well. So investing in these different aspects is key. And do we have 2 more? I was not watching the time. I don't want to be too long. But in terms of policy options on digital skills, expand the training available on these different skills that I just mentioned, but also ensure the quality of the trainings. Provide certification of skills as well, so that it's acknowledged on the domestic market, but also outside. And again, raise awareness of existing support. And last but not least, within firms themselves, encourage on-the-job training. I'll stop here.
Thank you so much. So talking about, if I can stay still with you, so digitalization, extremely important, but that is just one element of overall when we talk about innovative technologies, innovations and things. So what other than digitalization is important part that you explained, would you bring in as an important element for the innovation for Moldova? As a part on increasing productivity and convergence, of course.
So with regards to innovation, what our recent research showed was, and I'm going to repeat a bit what was said before, the importance of access to finance, of course. Especially, one of the key recommendations we had was on the need for indirect financial support as well, because in Moldova we're seeing more and more support provided by the National Agency for Research and Development, ODA as well, but yeah, indirect financial support would be one important point. And then I'll repeat myself a bit on the ecosystem collaboration. Really, that's key to have more involvement of external stakeholders, but also more collaboration between businesses and the academia. This quadruple helix model of cooperation between government, private sector, academia, civil society. I think this is planned, if I'm not mistaken, I think I've seen it in some policy documents, but we're waiting to see it also on the ground. And I would also I'm thinking also about formal education and our research on human capital, more collaboration between SMEs and general schools. That would also be an important point. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe Giuseppe, I can turn now to you. So, in addition to facilitating new firms entering the market, very important element is allowing them to grow and enable them to grow. And aside of this financial support, which was actually very nicely shown in Luca's presentation, what is the importance of that one? What do you see else as important in helping companies grow? And from the EBRD's perspective and your involvement with the private sector, how do you see it?
Thank you very much. And I'm really happy to come after Solon because I think we have a lot of, sort of responses to the points that you highlighted. So hopefully, it's working. Let me just start by saying that indeed, I think as EBRD, the bank, we are an IFI that was born in the 90s, specifically focusing on the transition to private sector. So that's fundamentally, the role that we see as a bank. We believe that, long-term sustainable growth can only be achieved with, a very strong and productive private sector in the country. So that's our mission, and that's where we focus. So we've been working, across the region with basically tens of thousands of SMEs to develop them, combining both financing and advisory tools together. And I think, in fact, our latest, let's say, view on this is exactly that. It's not enough just to provide financial support, but it's really important to combine it with advisory support in an integrated view that basically goes beyond just the entry level, is what we call the growth journey of individual SMEs. So we have kind of an approach which is on 3 pillars that I would like to go through and provide examples about how we are trying to implement these pillars in Moldova specifically. The first pillar is about, this integrated approach via our financial partners, via the banks that we work with. The second one is the direct support that the bank can provide to some of our SME clients. And the third one is the ecosystems and awareness that exactly was mentioned before. So if I can go quickly through them, when we are now trying to partner more with our partner financial institutions and provide more non-financial services to SMEs that we mobilize through our donor support. So to give you a couple of examples of what we're doing in Moldova, I think earlier this year with ProCredit Bank, we managed to reach out to more than 25 women-led SMEs as sub-borrowers. And next week, to give you another example with MAIB, we hope to launch a similar cooperation to support 50 sub-borrowers to enhance their capacity to export to the EU. And I think this is, of course, very important and is supported by the EU. If we switch to the second pillar of our activities in terms of direct SME engagement, we have a number of programs, but I would like to mention two in particular. One is the Star Venture that we have for startups, and the other one that is the Blue Ribbons that we have for SME leaders. This basically extends the advisory support that we provide for, let's say, 24 months or for 5 years, depending on the program. And we see this is quite successful in Moldova. So again, a couple of examples. We have been supported Fagura, which is this fintech company that was born in Moldova but became very active actually in Romania in terms of crowdfunding. And another very successful example that we have in terms of the Blue Ribbon program is Accedum, which is the first and only poultry producer in Moldova, which is certified to export to the EU. And we started working with them in 2017 when their turnover was 3 million euros and is now more than 12 million euros. So I think it's a nice example of growth in productivity, making use of the EU access to the EU market and growth. And the third is the third pillar is exactly what OECD was mentioning before, is about raising awareness, providing support to platforms and ecosystem to have horizontal impact in the economy and tackle more than individual firms having a systemic approach. In terms of startup ecosystem development, we are supporting 5 accelerators in Moldova. And when it comes to, let's say, more digital platform, we have a number of activities, as for example, we help the organization of the Moldova Digital Summit this year. So we're trying to do as much as we can. It's not probably a revolutionary approach, it's more of an evolutionary approach, which is, that recognizes the importance of combining financial support and non-financial support, but also target it a bit more to match the life cycle of these companies and go beyond just the entry into the market.
Thank you very much. So some of you already mentioned some of the barriers on exiting the market. As we all agree that equally important as allowing firms to enter the market is to also facilitate their efficient exit of the unproductive firms. Salome, OECD often emphasizes the importance of bankruptcy framework in this. How does Moldova compare, and where do you see the main gaps or what needs to be done in this area?
So I won't come back too much on the importance. I think we have understood the importance of bankruptcy and second chance policies, that they underpin creative destruction. Just to still in one sentence, what we see in OECD research in OECD countries is that in economies with well-functioning frameworks, capital and labor are reallocated faster, viable firms can restructure, and entrepreneurs can take a second chance after failure. So this ultimately increases productivity and can also boost investments. Conversely, in the absence of such mechanisms, resources get trapped in low-performing firms, slowing down growth and convergence. Now, how does Moldova compare? I've mentioned it briefly before. In the OECD SME Policy Index, it's actually the weakest policy dimension. It's really the area where Moldova performs lowest, and it's been like this for several assessments. But I want to emphasize that this is not a Moldova-specific problem. It's traditionally, we've seen it for many years now in the Eastern Partnership region. It's really the area where Eastern Partner countries perform lowest. And I think beyond the Eastern Partnership, it's a joint challenge across Europe. Now, to bring in positive note. Still, we've seen some improvements since 2020. Of course, COVID-19 had something to do with this. Moldova, like other Eastern Partner countries, has updated its insolvency framework, the insolvency law, which is a welcome step. I'm thinking here, for instance, about the introduction of the simplified bankruptcy procedure, which is, again, a welcome step. But legal reform alone is not enough. Of course, it's one of the building blocks, but it should be complemented. And beyond that, we should be looking at preventive measures, early warning mechanisms, such as self-test for entrepreneurs, but also advisory services. And on the other hand, as I've mentioned before, second chance policies. On preventing measures, we've seen some efforts being done in Moldova, some initiatives, some pilot programs. We know that this was something under discussion to implement such, for instance, such self-test, such targeted support, so we're waiting to see the concrete implementation. And then on second chance, this remains in that topic, the weakest sub-dimension. And again, not only in Moldova, in other Eastern Partner countries, also, I mean, in general, in Europe. So in the Eastern Partnership country, neither Moldova nor any neighboring country has a concrete second chance policy. So priorities for improvement. One would be following the legal reform to build more capacity, especially judicial capacity. There is no specialized insolvency court, for instance, yet having such specialized courts could accelerate case resolution. And then following what I just said on preventing measures, implement a comprehensive early warning system. Because what we see, and here I'm talking generally about OECD countries, what we see is that oftentimes when entrepreneurs reach out for help, it's already too late. So having first a self-test, online self-test that entrepreneurs in financial distress can access to understand where they stand and what they can do would be an interesting option. And then later on, advisory services. And then on second chance policies, here again, some targeted support, some debt counseling, for instance, so that, as we heard, so that firms who went bankrupt don't get stuck in financial procedures for too long and can have a fresh start. But also mentoring and access to resources, financial resources without discriminatory treatment would be important. But more broadly, at society level, I would say an important point to tackle is the stigma of failure. And this, again, I'm speaking broadly in Europe, in OECD countries. We know that this persisting stigma of failure is hampering risk-taking, which also is linked to innovation. I haven't mentioned it before, but of course you need to take risks to innovate. So fostering a cultural change would be perhaps the one point I really want to emphasize. Now, how do you do this? We don't have the final answer, but some of the interesting policy options we've been seeing in OECD and EU countries included awareness raising. Here again, for instance, some events with successful entrepreneurs who had failed the first time they started a company, but then became very successful. And if we look at the global stage, I'm sure we have plenty of examples of very successful entrepreneurs who actually failed the first or second time and then ended up succeeding. And to end on quoting yet another OECD survey, we see that entrepreneurs who are at their, let's say, second or third company perform better than first-time entrepreneurs. So to end on that note, yeah.
Thank you very much. So we have like 5 minutes. So maybe this is a good time to turn to the audience in case someone has a question for our panelists. Okay. So. Okay, so then, since there are no questions from the audience, we heard a lot. Now I'm trying to summarize, but it is not that easy, as many things were mentioned. Thanks a lot for the rich discussion in that area. So we heard that we need to strengthen competition, improve the governance, continue with digitalization, but also touch upon other innovation areas. Critical is improving skills and fostering education. Infrastructure and connectivity also comes in. And very important is collaboration between different areas. So, but since we have a time, and I would like to actually conclude with just one forward-looking question to all of you, but super short. You mentioned a lot of things, but if we are to prioritize, and if you are to pick one thing that is critical, what would that be? Well, okay, let's start from Ulrich, from that side here. So.
Hoping that my colleagues would mention the other items, I would like to mention and prioritize that the transformation, the structural transformation, will create winners and losers. And there will have to be a system in place of social protection that buffers these changes. And since we haven't mentioned that, I would like to highlight this for completeness of the reform agenda, that the focus on social protection in the transition is very important, and I think it's very well documented from experience that it's critically important.
Thank you very much. I think on my side, I want to go back maybe to the first question, which was a bit more general in terms of the lessons learned from accession. And I think, in a sense, Moldova is a great opportunity. You know, you can follow the path that we saw in Southern and Eastern Europe, where you had this productivity growth that was moving, let's say, from labor and capital, from agriculture into manufacturing and increasingly complex industries. But we also see a new global trend that, given the industrial policy and everything that is changing, we see more and more countries moving directly into the service space. So I think, in a sense, Moldova has the opportunity to get the best of both worlds. You can integrate in the EU and be part of the European value chains, and at the same time also fast forward and develop, from scratch, not waiting to have, let's say, manufacturing, develop already a service industry. So I think this is something that could be explored.
I second very much Ulrich's comment, because many of these policies take more than one electoral cycle to take roots. If these companies that go through the triage, their labor goes through the triage and they're just there without any other opportunity, they would definitely say this is bad policy, so we won't be able to go through the sometimes painful readjusting. On the other thing, I would say there's a dimension that generally, as we look at countries, but actually these companies live in cities. We have this major migration from the rural side to the urban area, and I think our policies, of course, central banks don't get into that, but I think this is a very relevant aspect of these policies. I think we're going to see this migration perhaps outwards, but also inwards from the countryside to the city. The best joke is, let's build another capital, because then we would, converge by 2030. Services happen in cities, so we need an urban infrastructure that supports knowledge creation, knowledge sharing, and so on and so forth.
Okay, so to complement this, because I was hesitating between fostering the level playing field and skills, so I'll go on skills to complement what was already said. Because we talked about skills shortages, but perhaps to emphasize the skills mismatches. So I would, beyond investing in skills, also making sure you invest in the skills that are required by the market. And one, perhaps to end on one policy option that I hadn't mentioned before, skills assessment and anticipation tools, like really labor market forecasts, understanding what is needed and what is going to be needed in 5-10 years' time, so that you can design already ready, the policies to answer these challenges and opportunities.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks a lot for the extremely rich discussion. So we can conclude agreeing that business dynamism can play an important role in fostering productivity and growth. But however, there is no silver bullet to enhance it. It has to come with a comprehensive set of reforms and to tackle different areas. But once again, thank you so much for this discussion.
Thank you to all our panelists for this highly relevant discussion. European Union integration requires not only alignment with standards and regulations, but also real growth in productivity and better life standards for our citizens. What we have here today from our panelists confirms something essential. This growth does not happen on its own. Success is built on innovation and commitment to implementing international best practices so that we can provide citizens and the businesses environment with conditions to grow, develop, and invest.